morning. Wally, can you lead us in a word of prayer before we start class? Thank you. Thank you. So this morning we're going to look at kind of a transitionary figure, but I'll start off, and you don't have to answer it now, but at the end of the class maybe you'll have an answer for me. Andy knows what it is, so I've always wondered, why is Samson mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11 as one of the pillars of faith? Doesn't really, based upon my reading, he doesn't necessarily fit in with all the other people who are listed there, but we'll go through Samson today and maybe y'all will have an answer when we're done. So the story of Samson, one of the judges of Israel, starts in chapter 13 of Judges. And Samson is another one of the times that God intervenes and predicts a birth. And he reaches out to Samson's mother initially and tells her she's going to have a child who has a specific purpose. His purpose is going to be to free the Israelites from the Philistines. And so that's been kind of given as his role. And she is told he is going to be a Nazirite. Now, being a Nazirite is outlined in Numbers chapter 6. So they talk about the things that a Nazirite has to do in Numbers chapter 6, verses 1 through 21. Who else has been considered a Nazirite in the Bible? Good. John the Baptist is one who is some scholars would say as a Nazirite. Anybody else? The other would be Samuel. Now, once again, in both cases, John the Baptist and Samuel are not referred to as Nazirites. They each have a peculiar set of conditions that went along with their births. They were both pre-told births, and they were both set apart. But neither is referred to as a Nazirite. So they could have been a Nazirite. I mean, it's not really clear, but the one in the Bible who is clearly identified as a Nazirite and was told to live his life as a Nazirite is Samson. Now, to understand that most of what Numbers chapter 6 is talking about are people who take on a Nazarene vow for a set period of time. It was not meant to be a dedicated lifestyle. So people would set themselves apart to focus on a certain event or a certain period. If you research it, a lot of the Nazarene vows were for a week, a month, a year, where they set apart and were focused on a particular task. And then there was a cleansing ritual that came when you moved away from your Nazirite vow. Samson was unique. So his mom had an angel appear to her and told her husband what was going to happen. And he wasn't as skeptical as maybe some would be, but he asked for the angel to return, and he did. And the angel told him what was to happen. And the interesting thing about that was, if you go through Judges 13, this angel appeared as a man. They wanted to host him for a dinner, and they asked him his name. And he told them, A, he wasn't staying for dinner, and B, some translations say his name is Wonderful. I don't think that's the correct translation. I think the actual words there is incomprehensible. And then as they were making the sacrifice, the angel disappeared in the fire. So that's kind of how Samson came to be. And then if you pick up in chapter 14, we have our first real kind of story about Samson. You know, he decides, actually, I'm a little bit ahead of myself. If you go to, we'll start with 14. Samson goes down to Timnah and sees a Philistine woman and returns and tells mom and dad, I'm going to marry her. Now, this isn't a violation of your Nazarene vow. This is your violation of God's command to the Israelites. They were told not to intermarry. And once again, Samson's not the first one to fail on this particular task. But he clearly fails. And he tells his parents that he's wants to marry this woman. And to his mom and dad's credit, their first response is, can't you find a good Jewish woman? To which Samson says, nope. So read verse 4, because this is interesting, and I have to admit, in my studies, I kind of passed over it. Samson tells his father, get her for me. She's the right one for me. His parents did not know this was from the Lord, who was seeking an occasion to confront the Philistines, for at the time they were ruling over Israel. So, the Lord obviously had a plan. Now, is he the one that caused Samson to violate his Israeli vows? Don't know. But once he's committed to this path, the Lord's like, we're going to make it happen. I have a purpose in this. And so, yeah, it's interesting to read the commentaries on whether or not this was always God's plan or Samson sinned and God just decided to take advantage of it. So you can read your own commentaries and draw your own conclusions. But God has a plan for Samson. And so he goes about this marriage. And then, we have the famous story. He goes, starting in, starting in verse, my glasses are not strong enough, or my eyes are getting weaker. Verse 5. Samson went down to Timnah together with his mother and father, and as they approached the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring toward him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, so he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But he told neither his father nor his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and he liked her. Then going on, sometime later, he went back to marry her. He turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, and it was a swarm of bees and some honey, which he scooped with his hands, and he ate as he went along. When he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Okay, so I had always been taught that this was a violation of his Nazarene vow. Actually, if you read Numbers chapter 6, it doesn't deal with dead animals. It deals with dead people. Now, it's unclean in the Jewish sense of privileges in Leviticus. You're not to touch dead animals. That's very clear. But it's not actually a Nazarene violation. So those of you who taught me that it was, please review and get back to me. But so he continues on, and I think everybody kind of knows the story from here, where he tells these people who are kind of his cohorts in the marriage, call them his best men. His 30 best men, I got a riddle for you. And if you can solve it, I'll give you 30 sets of clothes. And Wally's got this one. So he does. And we see an interesting characteristic of Samson that we're going to see again. So he tells the riddle. So the 30 men pressure the family. The family pressures the bride-to-be. The bride-to-be nags Samson. What does Samson do? He gives in. He gives them the answer. And so as we know, then, it comes to a conclusion where they solve the riddle. Now we move into, and this is Jeff's opinion, this is not in any commentary you're ever going to read. Samson now moves into the version of stupid. So his riddle has been solved, but he calls his wife a heifer. Okay? I don't care how mad I've ever gotten at Julie. Never, ever crossed my mind to call her a heifer. Not good for the marriage. Men, Please raise your hand if you've ever thought it was appropriate to call your wife a heifer. That's what I thought. Well, Samson now has a problem. He now has to go find these 30 clothes, 30 sets of clothes. And so I didn't write this one down, so I'll have to. Okay, verse 19 of chapter 14. Then the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, and he went down to Escalon, struck down 30 of their men, stripped them of their belongings, and gave the clothes to them who had explained the riddle. Burning with anger, he went up to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to her friend who attended at the wedding. Okay, so, Larry, you make a bet. You lose. You don't have the money. What are you going to do? You're not just killing. All right, so Samson goes, he's dramatic. I'll give him that. Samson is extremely dramatic. But the interesting part of that reading was the Lord came upon him. This wasn't Samson by himself. And I've always wondered why the Lord came upon him to go kill 30 people. I don't have a good answer for you, so it's just something I'm going to throw out to the class. But the Lord came upon Samson, and he went to this town and slaughtered 30 men and came back and said, you won your riddle, here's your clothes. Then he went off angry. He went back home. So this is twice now that the Lord has, quote, quote, come upon Samson. The first was when he slaughtered the young lion. And the second now is when he kills 30 men for their clothes. And then he storms off. So the initial views of Samson, even though, quote, quote, the Lord was upon him, aren't really. Okay. Jeff does not walk away with a positive opinion of Samson so far. He seems fairly headstrong. I'll get to you in a second. Fairly headstrong and fairly impulsive. So absolutely. Right. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And I think Sue's point is valid as we go through here. Samson is a sketchy character that God is going to use as he goes through his time. And there's an interesting part about Samson that I do want to point out. So Samson returns back to his father, his supposed father-in-law, and says, I'm back. And he says, too bad. Gave her away. And it's interesting of the culture. So what does he do? It's not the first time we've seen this. Oh, she's got a younger sister who's better looking. Why don't you take her? Samson's not interested. So then Samson does another thing that is an immense feat of strength. He goes and somehow corrals 30 foxes. So corralling 30 foxes in and of itself is quite the feat. But then he ties their tails together in pairs. So he's got 30 foxes, 150 pairs, which he has physically tied together. And then somehow he lashes torches to said animals and sets them loose. And it burns down, go ahead. 300, I'm sorry. No, it's 300, my bad. I'm old, 300. Just a zero. But she is correct. It's 300, 150 pairs. And he sets them loose. And they, of course, with the fire on their tail, they're not happy, so they're running amok. And it basically burns down the livelihood of the entire town. It burns down their wheat fields. It burns down their fruit-bearing trees. And then, just at the times, what is the response of the people of that village? They go back to the supposed father-in-law to be, and the bride to be, and burn them. So, I mean, this is not a period for the weak of heart. So then, the next time, Samson now goes and hides in a cave. Okay, and the Philistines obviously not happy about their olive groves, their vineyards, and their wheat being burned up. And the Philistines basically go up to Judah and say, we need him. We're not even yet. So where is he? And Samson was hanging out in the cave. And so the Israelis go and down there and they say, hey, look, our hands are kind of tied here. We're going to have to turn you over. And what's the thing that Samson asked of the Jews? His only condition to the Jews: don't kill me. So the Jews, being very thorough people, not only they lash him with new rope, basically new calf skins. So he's pretty well bound over. So if you go down to verse 13 of chapter 15, the Israelis say, agreed. We will only tie you up and hand you over to them, meaning the Philistines. We will not kill you. So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came toward him, shouting. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power. Once again, as Sue pointed out, miraculous feats of strength. It's very clear the Lord intervenes at this point. The ropes on his arms became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 of them. Then Samson said, with a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramah Lehi. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, you have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he was revived. So, we've got this period. We don't know exactly how long this period is, but our introduction to Samson is his miraculous birth. We know that the Lord's Spirit was upon him. He was to live as a Nazarene, and he goes off and wants to have a Philistine wife. So, all in all, pretty full life at this point. He's burned down a village, killed 1,000 people with a jawbone, killed a young lion with his bare hands, and has shown great passion. But then we had this period at the last verse there, verse 15, to be honest with you, I never really paid attention to. Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So, he's done all this. He's, sought his revenge and demonstrated God's power over him. But then we have this blank period. We just know for 20 years, Samson was a judge over Israel. We don't know if it was good. We don't know if it was bad. We don't know if it was indifferent. We just know he was in charge. He was the judge of Israel for 20 years. And, I went out and looked to see if there was any secular writings on this period. Anything in Jewish history. Nothing. You got a 20-year gap here. You don't really know what happened with Samson during those 20 years. And maybe he was very good as a judge. We don't know. The next time we see him, he's doing a repeat. It's like rinse and repeat. 20 years go by and he decides he's lonely. I'm sorry? Could be. Oh, yeah, with a bone. Yeah, and it's that period, and it's Samson's time to reign. He's the last of just the what I would call the single-minded judges. We have Samuel, who's going to follow next, who is referred to as a judge as well, in 1 Samuel chapter 7. But Samuel was kind of unique because he played the role of a prophet, he played the role of a judge, and he played the role of a priest. And then he's going to go and name the first king. So the pure single-purpose, single-focus judges, the last one is Samson. So now we see him, and if you go into chapter 16, now 20 years has gone by. We don't know what's happened in between. But then it says, one day, Samson went to Gaza where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. The people of Gaza were told, Samson is here. So they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night. They made no move during the night, saying, at dawn we'll kill him. But Samson lay there only until the middle of the night. Then he got up, took hold of the doors of the city gate, together with the two posts, and tore them loose, bar and all, and lifted them to the shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Okay, you got to give the guy credit. He can put on a show. So I got so many different answers for how much this was going to weigh that I gave up. But the minimum weight was 500 pounds. It went way up from there. So here's this guy getting up in the middle of the night, going to the front of the city, taking the gates and the iron post, and decide to grab him and take him to the top of a fairly steep hill and leave him there. So getting back to what Wally said, kind of reinforces the message of, you really don't want to bother me. You kind of want to leave me alone. So then he doesn't give up there. So then we have the famous story of Delilah. So once again, I think probably everybody here is familiar with the Delilah story, but Samson kind of got tired of the prostitutes and then went and had a relationship with Delilah. Now, Delilah has a set goal. What is that set goal? Right. She wants to figure out where Samson's power comes from. And why is she doing this? Money. Getting paid. So we go through the same thing where she keeps asking Samson, blah, 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 blah. Finally, Samson caves and tells her where his power comes from. Then Samson falls to sleep and off goes his hair. But not by Delilah, by a Philistine man. For those of you who do Trivia Pursuit. It wasn't Delilah. It was a Philistine man who shaved his head. And we know that from there, Samson gets his eyes poked out, and he's basically a freak show for the Philistines. And, I've always kind of viewed Samson as an interesting guy. I mean, we know what happened when he tried to get married. We know what happens when he goes to Gaza with the prostitute and Delilah. And he fails miserably. He doesn't look good. I mean, you're kind of wondering what the Spirit of the Lord was doing in him. How does he behave this way? But he's not the only one. I mean, we're not going to have to live very long before we see a king who gets one wish and asks for wisdom, and then proceeds to behave multiply in the same way. Andy, how many concubines and wives did Solomon have? There you go. You can get as much wisdom as you want from God, but as Samson and Solomon and everybody, most of the other Old Testament characters prove, if you don't apply it to a godly life, you're going to fail. And Samson fails miserably. But, as always, In this case, God has a plan. He has a plan for Samson. And so they're having a huge feast, and they decide to bring Samson out as, once again, a circus act for the Philistines. While they were in high spirits, I'm in chapter 16, verse 25, bring out Samson to entertain us. So they called Samson out of prison, and he performed for them. When they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servants who held his hand, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple, so I can lean against them. Now the temple was crowded with men and women. All rulers of the Philistines were there, and on the roof were about 3,000 men and women watching Samson perform. Then Samson prayed to the Lord, O sovereign Lord, remember me. O God, please strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Then Samson reached towards the 2 pillars on which the temple stood, bracing himself against them, his right hand on the one, the left hand on the other. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he pushed with all of his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and all the people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than while he lived. So we see with Samson, he hasn't lost sight of God's purpose in his life, even though he seems to have had a circuitous journey. And the one thing that stood out from what I read there was Samson's motive. Samson wasn't looking out for the Jewish people. Samson wanted revenge for Samson. So even in his moment of seeking the Lord, he's not doing it as a leader of the Jews. He's doing it for selfish revenge. He did not ask to have the strength to kill our enemies. He asked specifically for what they had done to him. Now, once again, God heard his request and gave him what he asked for. And as it said, he killed more people in this one instance, more Philistines in this one incident than he did throughout his life. But I think the story of Samson, for me, is positive in that God can work through even the most flawed of us if we stay focused. I mean, what we know about Samson is not a pretty picture. I mean, it's not a man that anybody, well, I shouldn't say that. It's not a man, when I review his history that we see here in these 3 chapters in Judges, that I would rank as one of the pillars of faith in the Jewish history. I mean, you go through that list in Hebrews 11, I actually did it. I went through and wrote down at least 10 people who I thought showed immense more faith than Samson. And Barak and Jephthah. But there's a reason why he's in that list. And we have to assume it's what occurred in those 20 years that we have no idea what went on. Because, one of the commentators wrote, he's there because of his last act. And I'll be honest with you, in reading his last act, I don't show that as a great faith. I just show that as a guy who wanted revenge and asked God for one last opportunity. Didn't strike me as great faith. Yes. Yep. Mhm. Sure. Right. That's a good point. Yeah. Right. That's a good point. Any other comments? Very good. Next week, we're going to start on Joshua.